Chapter 20. Monday morning. Last night, Doreen hadn't gotten a chance to pump Mac for any new information. She was upset at herself for not doing that. But she didn't want to interrupt such a lovely and friendly dinner. When he'd been called to work right afterward though, he'd taken the message and, with a cryptic look in her direction, had disappeared. He left her hoping for a tidbit of something to enlighten her, but he just shook his head and took off. He did apologize for not helping with the dishes, but she was almost used to it. She wondered idly if he had it set up with dispatch to give him a call, so he could run out on her at dishwashing time. Not that she'd done much in the way of cooking either, because it was all pre-cooked, and he'd done the noodles. But now it was morning again, and she faced so many more issues and tantalizing tidbits on various cases that she felt frustrated and curious. Finally, she sat down, opened up an email, and asked Mac what case he'd gone running out of the house for the previous night. Then she huffed when she didn't get an immediate response, deciding maybe she had just enough time with the rising river water to sneak one more walk out to Steve's to see if the police dogs and policemen were all done with the crime scene. After breakfast, she called the animals and led them outside to the back end of the creek. She stopped when she realized just how high the creek was. She gulped, but guessed that she still had enough walkway to go this way, and headed out along the water, trying to stay as dry as she could. Thaddeus was obviously disturbed at the change in the water depth too, as he walked back and forth on her shoulder, making an odd chuckling sound. Meanwhile, Goliath walked along higher ground as much as he could. She knew that if the water got any higher, she'd have to pick him up and carry him. Muggs wasn't too bothered, but she was more concerned about him falling into the main part of the creek, which was now moving very quickly. She walked as far up as she could, and made it just to the corner of Steve's property, where the river went out around a bend, and she could hop up onto his retaining wall. Technically, she was on private property at this point. She crept around the corner and took a look, but no cops appeared to be here, just the remains of the burned-down house. Freed up to walk the property, she headed toward the visible markers. She pondered at that because a crew wasn't here. And then she checked her watch and realized it was probably still early for them. Now closer to one of the markers, she noted grave-looking disturbances in the ground, but that had been refilled. When she finished counting them, her heart sank. 6, she whispered to her animals. What evil doings was Steve involved in? Not knowing if a crew was coming back right away or if they were done here, because it looked like there had been excavations and then the graves had been refilled again to stop people from falling in, she quickly scoured the property and the house itself and then walked out to the front road rather than return along the swollen creek. So she headed back toward home, passing the nearby house where Stephen had dropped his gun, and where it had been later found. Nobody was out and about. It was early, and it was a weekday, and those who had gone to work had definitely already left. Back at her house, she was grateful to see no one in the cul-de-sac taking pictures of her or her house. She walked up to the front door, let herself in, and headed back to the garden, where she swung open the kitchen door and left it ajar. She put on a pot of coffee and walked back outside to sit down and to assess her day. The walk had done a little bit to satiate her curiosity over Steve, since she figured Mac wouldn't tell her much. Chances were, the news channels would end up reporting on whatever they found on Steve's property, before Doreen even found out anything. So she could only focus on what she could focus on, and at this point, that appeared to be Manny's disappearance. But so far, she didn't have a lot to go on. Even if yesterday's conversation with Peter had been enlightening, it hadn't given her a lead as to where to go. Well, other than that distinctive truck that John drove. She wondered about going back and asking Peter a few more questions when her phone rang. She looked at it, not recognizing the number. "Hello," she said. "It's Peter," the man said hesitantly. She smiled and said, "Good morning, Peter. How are you?" "I'm okay. I'm at the shelter using their phone. It turns out they're okay with me making calls as long as it's not long distance. Good, she said. Did you have something more to tell me? I remembered something I found in my collection of belongings, he said. It's a letter from Manny. Oh, excellent, Doreen said in surprise. Why would he have written you a letter? He used to do it every once in a while, when he was planning on leaving. But his plans never worked out, so he never left. He would still leave me the letter, though. I think it was his way of trying to tell me that maybe I was a good person, and that I should find a way to get out of this. I think that's a good way to look at it, Doreen said. Does the letter say anything interesting? It says he was planning on leaving. But they all said that. Is this the only one that you still have? Yeah, he said. And the only reason I kept it is because he disappeared soon afterward. Did you show it to the police? He hemmed and hawed, then said, I don't know. Back then, I might have. But I might have forgotten all about it. I had a tendency to stuff my keepsakes in the bottom of my backpack, and then forget about them. I still have the same pack. Could I have a copy of the letter? You can, he said. I'm in the office. They said they would scan and email it for me. Perfect. Doreen gave him her email address, adding, I really appreciate this. I was thinking this morning and wondering if I should come down and see if you had any other information, because I'm not sure what step to take next. I was hoping the description of the truck would help, he said. And I know just because it had a Y at the end of the license plate doesn't help much, but I was hoping it would help some. She straightened. You didn't mention anything about the license plate. That might help. She heard him mumble something as she waited for an explanation. I tend to forget things, he said. And I don't have a great memory anymore. It's probably from the drugs. I think they've eaten too much of my brain. So, did you tell the police about that? I think so, he said. I don't remember much else about it, though. Black with the step-up sides, that crosshatch pattern in metal, and the Y on the plate. You couldn't see the driver, right? No, he said. Not enough to even know if it was a male or a female? No. I wish I had, he admitted. Over the years, I've wished for a lot of things, but that's one of the biggest. It's more information that would help find him. Okay, Doreen said. Oh, do you know any of Manny's regular Johns? Not really. Like I said, some were regulars, but a lot weren't. What about the regulars? Was there anybody you would have known? He snickered. Sure. The bank manager. He came around all the time. But other than that, not really. Doreen's instincts prodded at her. What bank manager was that? The one who used to be at the corner down here. He was fascinated with Manny's genetic condition. Ah, Doreen said, the gender identity issue. Yeah, but still he was female, right? So. Right. Physically, he was female, but he identified as male. Would you recognize the bank manager again? Probably, Peter said, but there wouldn't be any point. He's dead. Doreen's hope sagged. I'm sorry to hear that. What happened? Killed in a car accident, I think. Then he paused. Maybe it was a hit and run? Or maybe he was driving. He groaned. Like I said, my memory is not the same. What about his name? Any idea of what his name was? Norbert, he said. Norbert Watkins. How often would he see Manny? Considering he was one of his regular Johns. Once a week. And do you know if it was an actual? She trailed off. She wasn't sure how to put it. What was it? A job? Or did he just like him and want to spend time with him? It was a job, he said. Manny used to laugh at him and talk about him all the time. That doesn't sound very nice. Doreen stared off in the distance, wondering at the conversations likely to happen after every prostitute had a session with her John. Manny had his peculiarities, Peter said, so it made sense in a way. But he always used an affectionate tone when he talked about him. I think he cared. It's also the lifestyle, she admitted. Exactly, Peter said, sounding relieved. What about a purse? Did Manny carry one? Not really. Meredith loved them, and Manny never quite got used to not having one. He kept one stashed in the back alleyway. Not money or nothing worth much. Just old IDs and stuff. And a ring that mattered to him. Only it was a fake one, so no one stole it. The cops took the purse after he disappeared. He had a few personal items in the purse, and I gave that to the cops at the time. But honestly, I was so high back then, I think the bag had been already cleaned out by other people. Ah. Relieved to hear that explanation, which helped tie the purse into the police station, but not the contents, which most likely were tossed randomly ending up in Richard's yard, Doreen added, I'll try to look into that bank manager's name a little more. Anybody else? No. Well, there were more Johns before, but he slowly lost them. Why is that? I think it was the drugs, Peter said. We spent all our money to buy more drugs, didn't have anything left for food or a place to stay. Manny used to have a nice room where he could take the Johns to, and then his tricks ended up being just in the Johns' vehicles or in back alleys. Sometimes the Johns had a place. Right, Doreen said with a wince. And that's the stage he was at when he hopped into the black truck, right? Yes, he said. Okay, well, if you think of anything else. Check your email, Peter said. Doreen walked over to her laptop, opened it, waited for it to load, and then checked her email. The scan here's perfect, she said. Thank you. You'll still try, right? He asked in an anxious tone, as if worried Doreen wouldn't continue to look for Manny. I really want to know what happened. I'll do my best, she promised, but I'm not a miracle worker. I've had some success, but I don't want you thinking it's a guarantee. No, that's okay. It just makes me feel not quite so alone to think somebody's still looking for him. And I'm sure he's watching you from wherever he is, Doreen said. There was an awkward silence, and then Peter asked, Do you really think he's dead?